This is the Special Board of Commissioners meeting for Wednesday, October 27th, 2021. We are running from 6:30 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. If you would all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's get started with public participation.
Hi, Eric Jansen, Beech Tree Lane in Wayne. And I want to make a comment or a couple comments about the tree canopy management program. And admittedly, I'm going off what was in the report. I couldn't find any more detail. But the way it's laid out is to contract a consultant, then hire to do a GIS survey, then hire a full-time tree maintenance coordinator, and then invest an appropriate amount of funding. I'd like to suggest that you think bigger. Develop a position and description that's more than just a maintenance coordinator. There's many stakeholders in the township and administration, as well as the broader community, that should have input on what the position looks like. And this is an opportunity for the township and the environment in which we live. Consider hiring for the position before doing any kind of tree inventory. It might make sense to do a tree inventory, a GIS inventory for the willows, but I'm not so sure it makes sense to do it for the entire township. And it's important that that person in the position has input and is able to learn during that time. And then also consider not spending money on a tree inventory. A tree inventory is only a snapshot in time, as any database is, and it needs to be maintained long-term to have any value. And possibly begin with using resources already available, such as shade tree applications, township planning programs, tree giveaway data, PADEP, PADCNR, Penn State GIS, aerial and LiDAR maps that are all available online. Public Works observations, those guys are everywhere in the township, and if they were minimal amount of training, I'll bet you they could give you some information. Crowdsourcing, apps, develop a community reporting structure, voluntary reporting by tree companies and landscapers doing work in the township. Those are just some thoughts. So, thank you.
Thank you. And let me also say parenthetically, if I'm squinting at you, I apologize. I know I keep saying this. I had eye surgery. This is the first meeting in a few days where I'm not coming with sunglasses on, but if I'm squinting at you, it's not because I think you're saying something funny, it's because I can't see you. You might also be saying something funny, though. I don't know. We'll see.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gretchen Grobel. I am a resident at 130 Woods Lane, and I also run Radnor Conservancy. So I am thankful that you are discussing tree maintenance. And thank you for recognizing their importance. Trees are part of community infrastructure, vital to community health. They're a positive impact on business and the tax base. They're a community legacy and a wise investment of community dollars. Preventive maintenance reduces risk and the cost of storm damage. In this process, I encourage that you guys work alongside the Shade Tree Commission. And in your planning, please consider your goals, objectives, and strategies at what you're trying to achieve. I know that in the material that you published, there was information about a possible GIS urban tree canopy analysis. That is a top-down look at the canopy, and that type of analysis answers these questions, but I don't believe that it tells you about the health of the trees in the township. It tells you how much tree canopy we have, who owns the tree who owns those trees or where the trees are located, how much room there is to plant trees, and what and where the canopy is distributed within the township. A different type of inventory that you could also consider is a physical street tree or park inventory, which tells you about the health of the trees on the ground, their location, and the types of trees. You could keep a database that you could update with removals and new plantings. And also, you could use it to store information about opportunities about where to plant new trees or plant trees in the future. And as Eric Jansen mentioned, there are so many state and local organizations that can help with advice and resources. I just did a 6-session course from Penn State Extension on community forestry management, which was incredible. So Pennsylvania DCNR has a Bureau of Forestry, Penn State Extension, U.S. Forest Service, Tree Vitalize, Tree Pennsylvania, and there's many online resources, of which a number of their tools are free. PA Community Tree Map and iTree tools. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Margaret Reinhardt, and I live at 6 Clover Lane in Wayne. I'm also the chair of the Radnor Township Environmental Advisory Council, and we had submitted a proposal for a sustainability manager. I was unaware that the tree situation was going to be discussed, but the trees would certainly fall under this. However, this is a larger proposal covering more topics in the environmental area. So if I could just read a few sentences from the accompanying letter that was sent with this proposal that we submitted to you. The issues that this new sustainability manager could oversee would include waste management planning, growing expectations regarding energy planning and solutions, and the township has signed on to the Ready for 100 and got the practical energy solutions. So this person could certainly play a very vital role in that. Also, evaluating projects and construction for optimum environmental outcomes, issues with flooding, climate change mitigation, and many, many others. So this would be a person knowledgeable in this area. We propose that you hire a sustainability manager or officer to assist the Radnor Township staff as well as the Board of Commissioners. They could also work directly with the councils and commissions, such as our EAC, the Board of Health, the Design Review Board, Parks and Recreation, Planning Commission, Stormwater Management, and others. So even though this would entail an additional salary, we feel that it would result in net savings by reducing the need to hire any outside expertise, making prudent cost-saving, energy-based decisions, and by obtaining grants that could pay for or match the costs of a lot of projects. There are so many federal and state grants out there that really are beyond like our expertise in the EAC, and this person could potentially tap into a lot of federal and state funds. So also, and then as I said, working closely with many of the other township staff. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Sarah Pilling, 29 Garrett Avenue, building on what Margaret Reinhardt has just discussed. The Radnor Township Green Team, again, also, and it was the primary recommendation for the Practical Energy Solutions report, was that a sustainability engineer be hired who had provable expertise in grant writing, because it's all well and good to discover grant opportunities, but if there's no one to write the grant, it amounts to nothing. And one example was $1 million, no holds barred, no expectation of any match to, it was $1 million for EV chargers and an EV truck for the township, but there was no one to write the grant, and so it was never even applied for. So that's an example of one thing. The engineer will have the academic schools. Villanova now has a PhD program. Penn has a program, so you can find someone local. It will not be a nationwide search. To coordinate, document adaptive and mitigating factors to address our thought is specifically climate change. This position would be the point person first for the comprehensive review of township facilities, our zoning, and our saldo in particular, because there are many saldo changes that could be made which would make homes and commercials more energy efficient. Energy efficiency means reduction in expenditures. And if it's done in township buildings, it means it shows the taxpayers that the township is doing something for energy efficiency, and that's always good for taxpayers. These skills will save the township time and the taxpayers' money. The township has a committed and very busy staff. We all know it's lean and mean and green. So we need a coordinator. This person would be able to coordinate with other staff, both in actions and with grant writing. They would have the opportunity and skills to coordinate with the school district, the county's sustainability director. I know that Lower Merion has hired one, and with DVRPC, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning. We as the Green Team would support and collaborate with the sustainable engineer. This position should be able to return funds, costs back to the township. This position will be a unique position using the electric assessment already performed by PICO to effect a full assessment of the township building, public works, library, and Sulpizio Gym. They were all done by PICO, who outlined ways that the use of energy could be reduced, resulting directly in a lower electric bill. And they had projected for this building $30,000 a year saving every year. So I just want to encourage you to think very hard about this sustainability person. Climate change is here, whether you want to believe it or not, and we certainly aren't wildly happy about it, but it has proven itself. And the township has the opportunity to be on the cutting edge of this area in taking actions. Thank you.
Any additional public participation? Hearing none, sorry, come on up.
I hope this is relevant. Christy Perry, 125 West Wayne Avenue. I just wanted to suggest that if we want to have even greater beneficial outcome from the process of the tree management process for stormwater management and the well-being of people on the planet, that I've learned from entomologist Doug Tallamy that we need to have a broader discussion than just trees, but also about what's under the tree. A keystone tree is one that supports many insects and birds, and one that is planted on grass lawn is far inferior to one planted over a soft landing of diverse native keystone plants that help build complex food webs and provide critical habitat for a large number of beneficial insects, such as caterpillars, moths, and butterflies. So I would like to also repeat what some of the other folks have said, is work together with the Arbor Day Foundation or whoever designated us as a Tree City USA, and the Audubon Bird City folks, the Conservancy, the Shade Tree Commission, and maybe aim for an even higher goal so that maybe Radnor can become a Thrive city and a stellar example of an ecologically sustainable city where humans and the best of nature coexist and thrive in harmony. Thank you.
Okay, trying again. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving on to item 2, staffing.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just real quickly, as we've done in the other meetings, I just want to take a second and thank the board again for having these special meetings. I appreciate the opportunity, knowing how full our regular agendas are, to take another night out to dive into some of these issues with a little bit more specificity. With that, I'd like to ask the police department. We had 2 departments, well, more than 2 departments initially asked, but these are the 2 that we're bringing in front of the board for various positions. Asked each, both the police department and community development, to just take 5 minutes, give a brief presentation on the positions that are being requested, and then we'll continue the discussion after they're done.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. White. Commissioners, thank you for listening to the proposal from the police department. I would like to thank our staff from the Radnor Police Department, the men and women who serve every day. This is an augmentation and request for them, and also like to acknowledge the other departments we serve with, and Mr. White and Mr. Tate. We're asking for consideration for a 2-part enhancement to police services in Radnor Township. And specifically, what we're looking for is to have an emergency management coordinator and also create a high-density beat during primarily the daytime hours in the township that will augment safety. I'll get right into our next slide. Our emergency management coordinator sort of was a name that we did not really hear before, but the pandemic really drew that out. The emergency management position is one that coordinates emergency services, police department activities, township activities, and they get very specific. But normally we have a couple of storms a year, an incident or 2 such as a national championship, and they're remote issues. I think, as the commissioners are aware, Radnor Township and many other communities in the 5-county region have been extremely busy. And the need, in my mind, has presented a true job for an emergency management coordinator. Some of the things that an emergency management coordinator does, besides coordinating all of those services that I mentioned, they provide proactive hazard mitigation and risk assessment that relates to floods, storms, winter emergencies, dam failures, and other things. This is a very comprehensive and proactive approach to managing emergencies and other situations and really attempting not to have them or reduce their impact to the community. Our emergency manager would coordinate water rescue response, which is now a big topic in the township, as you're aware, and have supported many different upgrades to emergency services in that. Post-disaster documentation and reimbursement. This is a really big issue. As we know, the devastation that happens, emergency response, all hands on deck. But after that, there's many staff members from every division here that has to clean up and work with the finance department to hopefully get reimbursement. Many times if the state declares an emergency or the federal government, there is an opportunity to receive funding or at least reduce some of the financial impact from a storm, natural disaster, or even an event related to protests where you could get reimbursed. This position would work with all those teams and directly under the finance department supervision and help us get through that. There would be an active liaison with the county and state emergency operations center. This is a ever-growing event. The county keeps adding staff and different capabilities, as well as does the state, and we would have an active seat and capability to reach out to them and work on whatever respective project that is. Large-scale event planning, this is something that I really think can never be underestimated. Radnor Township, we're very fortunate as a destination where people want to have events, and we keep getting requests to do so, and the planning that goes into them is significant, such as the papal visit, and obviously I already mentioned the township. But it's ever going, and we have to keep updating those plans and keeping our team sharp. And none of these events go on with just the police department. It's fire, police, EMS, Public Works, everybody, finance department, and coordinating that is important. School safety seminars and building assessments. This is a never-ending task that we're extremely proud of and one of our top priorities. We send out letters. The commissioner's been contacted, and every year a new school has a new challenge or a new wing or some addition that has to go on. This would fall under this to make sure coordinated information not only is here at hand for our supervisors, but will also be relayed to Delaware County in their computer system and their emergency management team. The Knox Box program management still continues on. We'll continue to push that. We appreciate the commissioner's support, but we need to keep moving in that and having more people. We continuously get requests, and we'll also have to check their emergency information that is placed into those respective boxes. Obviously, COVID is still a part of us, and we need to coordinate our staff's response internally and make sure that our external resources are prepared and in line with the governor's requirements and the CDC's requirements. So that is an emergency management coordinator. I think you all have had a couple different parts of it. And the one thing I forgot to put in the PowerPoint is they would also conduct tabletop exercises and help train all the respective emergency services within the township and our township staff. Part two of this is a high density beat. And I'll show you an example of what that will look like. We're going to pass out some statistics. It's too much to read, and I'm going to skip over it. High-density beat, one of the things we want to do is we want to add a patrol zone during the daytime that would be staffed by 1 or 2 officers plus our normal 4-beat structure, and I'll show you what that looks like. Primary functions of this would be active shooter and emergency response time reduction, increased uniform officer presence during the peak times in our densely populated section of the township. We would staff this beat, and it can be broken into 2s for the schools and businesses on most days. We're starting out small and seeing how that works out, and we can always increase if we need to. Another feature of this would be beat cars are able to remain in their assigned areas, and I'll explain that a little bit when I show you the map. And we would increase the uniformed officer patrol availability in the entire township. What I like about adding something in a specific area, it would allow our border units to continue to stay in their beats as much as possible. You can always have a crazy busy day where everybody's pulled all over the township, but in general, it would allow us to have saturation and patrol in every corner and every beat or ward in the township, and that would allow us to do this with this high-density beat unit. Here's an example for the community and the commissioners. The red lines show what we would consider the high-density beats. I'm not going to read off all the names of all the high-priority areas that would be affected by this. But what you have is there's a couple dotted lines right in the middle of the township, basically right where the blue route crosses over. We would split that into 2 areas amongst our normal township coverage. The high-density beat officers would remain on patrol in those areas and only respond to calls in those areas. Of course, if we were that busy in another sector, of course they would go out and assist other calls. But they would primarily stay in these areas to reduce response time. To the community, I did hand the commissioners some information from the Secret Service, which studies active attacker incidents or active shooter incidents, and many of these are over 47% of active shooter incidents are over in 5 minutes or less. We want to try and marry that time together of our response time. I'll give you an example. This past week, we had 2 car accidents in West Lancaster Avenue. Those accidents required 2 to 3 units. What that meant is our lower Broomall car came up to assist them. The primary officer had to interview the injured and take information in the other car, and that car directed traffic. That meant that we pulled vehicles out of the area from not only normal beat and Broomall, but we also had the main or our busiest areas uncovered. By adding these sectors, we would be allowed to have officers who remain in those sectors, would not have responded to that incident, and would have been ready for either a crime. And one of our top priorities here is medical emergencies. And as you're aware, the fire company told you that they're busy. We agree with them saving lives. And we are a part of that and usually the first ones there. So this would allow an enhancement of those particular activities.
Sorry, is it possible to get a copy of that email to me? Could you email? I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you?
I'll make a whole copy of the whole thing for you right now, Commissioner.
Yeah, no. When you're done, that's fine. It's
Oh,
good
the
stuff.
report, yes.
Yeah, really good stuff. If email would be better, in case I could share it with.
Okay.
Just-
whatever.
We'll figure out what you
One of the comparisons in 2000, let me just go back to the map. But while you look at the total map, in 2001, we had 49 officers, and we responded to 13,267 calls for service. In 2019, we had 44 officers. We responded to 19,518 calls for service. In 2020, which is greatly affected by the pandemic and many closures, with 43 officers, we handled 15,286. And we are in line as we go through 2021 to exceed the 19,000 call mark. So the officers do remain busy. We are functioning. And in fact, if you look at those numbers, Villanova University started a police department. Several of our calls that would go there for calls for service have been eliminated. So our call volume, we do remain an active police department with different, those are calls for service. That does not count proactive incidents or what our staff traffic unit does or detectives as far as follow-ups and other things. But just to give you a little bit of a perspective of what we have, we took a couple images just to show. We have heard of proposed hotel and other office space coming, so there is the potential for us to grow, it seems, in certain corridors of the township. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Is there any commissioner questions?
I do just have a question. When you say calls for service, as you know, we use 911 for all calls, even non-emergency calls. So are those all calls that are coming in, or are they calls that require an immediate response, emergency or not? I mean, I'm thinking like dog barking comes in through 911. Are we including those in the numbers?
That could be a call for service listed here, Commissioner. So it doesn't necessarily, we do get a lot of calls at the station. I know you're an advocate for people of knowing to call 911, so I do remind the community that any incident, minor or large, you would want to utilize the 911 system to get the promptest service possible. But yes, this would account for service calls such as a dog barking, a struck deer, to a burglary in progress.
And the officers you have now, we have 45 officers?
Our authorized strength is 45 sworn personnel.
And we're at 45?
Yes, we are maintaining that now with the new officer we just brought on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present Community Development's request for the 2022 budget for your consideration. Community Development is requesting 2 items this year, a comprehensive plan update and fire safety inspection program. As we've discussed over the last couple of months, the update to our comprehensive plan is, in my opinion, sorely needed. The budgeted amount is $200,000 that we're proposing to spread over 2 years, so $100,000 in 2022 and $100,000 in 2023. Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code recommends that the comp plan be updated every 10 years. Our last comprehensive plan update was done in 2003, so we're about 8 years past the recommended time to update that. And a lot of things happen during that time period. The township grows, the businesses grow, the population grows, the strain on traffic and the utilities and all the things that comprehensive plans look at are things that need to be reviewed. So a lot of that has changed, so it's important to capture those changes as part of that. The comprehensive plan is an important tool that sets forth the framework of our subsequent ordinances, the stormwater management ordinances, zoning, subdivision land development, and it identifies how and where development should or should not go. So our recommendation is to include that as part of the 2022 budget. Secondly, fire safety inspection programs. Currently, Radnor Township only has a formal inspection program for rental housing, for residential rental housing. We do not have a formal inspection program for commercial properties. There are approximately 1,700 businesses in the township that would qualify underneath the International Fire Code for fire safety inspections. The International Fire Code was adopted by the Board of Commissioners in February of 2010. Several of the other chapters that we have as part of that, Chapter 166 of our local ordinance, the Director of Community Development, myself, or any authorized agent or employee thereof shall be designated as the fire code official for the purposes of this code. International Fire Code Section 104.1, the fire code official is hereby authorized to enforce the provisions of this code. And International Fire Code Section 106.2, the fire code official is authorized to conduct such inspections that are deemed necessary to determine the extent of compliance with the provisions of this code. Ideally, the fire safety inspection program would be utilized to identify and prevent life safety issues such as fires in public properties, dangers to, as a result of property owners' complacence, and equally as important, injury to local emergency services and first responders. When there's an active situation, those are the people that are running into these buildings to save lives, so we need to make sure that they're as safe as possible. The question always comes up, are these really needed? Are the conditions really that bad out there? Department staff, as I mentioned before, we don't have a formal program. They are in buildings only when there's an active application for a building renovation. So when we have the ability to get in there, we are identifying a lot of issues, and I'll go through some of those. The picture up on the left is a broken egress emergency light. So if there was an emergency at night, people wouldn't see where they're either needing to get into the building or being able to leave in an emergency. The expired fire extinguisher, this picture was taken in September of 2020. The date that this expired was June of 2018, so it was over 2 years expired past. And that's important because they lose their charge, and you go to pick it up thinking that you're going to be able to fight a fire, and nothing comes out, and it becomes extremely problematic. Or overloaded outlets. You can see right in here, it is probably a residential grade outlet extender and a commercial property with numerous extension cords coming off of that, so that can create an overloaded overheating situation that can cause a fire or electrical shock. We see lots of boxes that are uncovered for work done without permits and left uncovered. We have an example of a blocked means of egress in a business, so people would not be able to get out to the stairwell to exit this property. This is in a basement of a facility that sells furniture, and it was completely obstructed to be able to get in there, or exposed panels that can create a shock or electrocution hazard. Another out-of-date extinguisher. This was taken in August of 2021. This extinguisher expired in July of 2017, so it was last serviced in July of 2016. And same issues as I noted before with that. Open penetrations. This allows smoke and fire to leave the room of question and travel throughout the building. And the picture on the right is an exit door where the emergency exit light has been removed. Probably they were doing some interior renovations and painting and just never put it back up there. It's all well and good if there's an emergency during the day, but if there's an emergency at night, people are not going to be able to find their way because there's no lit indication of where the exit's at. Another example of an electrical room that is blocked along with a fire extinguisher. We have improper storage of chemicals. This is a pool facility where they're storing chlorine in the electrical room that can create corrosion and also an explosion hazard, as well as missing cover plates on switches and outlets, again, creating a electrical shock hazard. We see people putting in drop ceilings and just punching through a light fixture without proper boxing and connections or protection for the bulbs. Sometimes there's no electrical boxes shown in the middle picture with just the rough conduit and wire nutted light fixture on there, or the picture on the right, a exterior light on the side of a building along a parking lot that was just removed wire nuts on there. And again, somebody can easily go up there, touch that, and get electrocuted. We're also seeing some significant structural issues in some of our buildings. There were 2 buildings that were brought to our attention this year that have some significant degradation of the concrete and support structures. You have concrete load-bearing beams that are corroding from the inside out, creating some spalling, and what ultimately happens is the concrete falls off of that, and now the reinforcing metal rebar in there is not only eroding from the inside out, but is now subject to corrosion from the atmospheric moisture. So we had that in a parking garage. We also had concrete columns that are reinforced with steel I-beams. And as you can see from the pictures, these I-beams were corroded completely through. Again, that is evidence from staining on the outside of the concrete. In this particular project, it was going under renovation, and the property owner saw it. They exposed a couple beams, decided that they saw this, exposed a few more, saw that it was a rampant issue, and the entire structure has been closed off for public access while they undergo severe renovations to fix those. And as we know, if we don't take these and get these addressed, as we saw earlier this year in Florida, that these things have significant life-altering consequences. Some of the same issues that we are seeing here in Radnor, we saw at the condo in Florida that collapsed. These were pictures that were taken in 2018 as part of a report. And ultimately, as you see in the picture on the left, what was a multi-story high-rise building, ultimately because of corrosion and the lack of follow-up on that, ended up leading to numerous deaths and the collapse of that structure. So what we're asking for as part of this is the Township Manager recommends that designating the vacant health officer position to fill this need. The expense for this position is already accounted for in the current base budget. The goals of the program would be to review building conditions for safety measures, fire equipment, address any associated concerns from the businesses, ensure that businesses are maintaining safe conditions, and ultimately protect the health, safety, and welfare of our community. The inspections will be done on an annual basis once the program is up and fully established, anticipating about a 2 to 3 year window to get that done. We have very limited information on all of our buildings and the businesses in them in terms of the use groups and what fire safety measures are required for those. So during that time period, we're going to be getting into there, making those documentations, collecting that data, creating a database for tracking and subsequent billing purposes in subsequent years. And then also, anytime you start a program like this, there's going to be a lot of follow back to make sure that those issues are being, the corrective measures are being taken to correct those. But ultimately, once we get rolling with this and get through the initial round, anticipate that it can be done in an annual basis. So the first round of inspections would be funded by the township, and as I noted before, that's one full-time equivalent position that we were proposing to fill from the vacant health officer position. So in subsequent years, as part of that data gathering, we would be developing a fee schedule based off of the type of use and the size of the buildings, and that would be directly billed to the business owners as part of that program. Those are the requests from community development.
Do we have any questions from commissioners?
Mr. Kachansky, what sort of qualifications would this person have? It seems like a big, broad thing this person has to be able to.
It can be broad. You know, when we look at those, the deformation of the concrete and the parking structures,
Yeah.
ultimately we see that it's a serious issue. You should never see the reinforcing steel coming through. So we ultimately then get a structural engineer or require a structural engineer to come out and make that assessment. Typically, it's somebody that has building code experience as well as emergency management, fire experience. So typically, a fire marshal's office has retired fire chiefs in it that also have some building qualifications and training.
And would the salary from the health officer be sufficient to cover this position?
We
Or
feel
really
that
we're talking about more?
It would be.
It would be?
Further questions?
So you mentioned that you're going to put together a fee schedule. Do you eventually anticipate this position might pay for itself if there's fees for permitting or things like that, if fines for having exposed wires or whatever?
Sure. Ultimately, we don't try to make a living off of fines. You know, the fines there are more of a deterrent to, make sure people are keeping up their property. But the fee schedule would be based off of a square footage graduated scale to cover the cost of the inspection program on subsequent annual inspections.
Is there interface, and I point to our fire department because they're there, would there be interface with our fire department on things like this?
Absolutely. We try to work hand in hand with the fire department, with our police department, particularly as new buildings are coming online so that we can all kind of get walkthroughs and have an understanding of what's there, and then rely on them to call if we're seeing something that is either not familiar to a code official, to get their expertise on how things should be done, or if there's a question on something, absolutely rely on both the fire departments and the police department for those things.
Would that mean like an additional cost for them to participate, or?
They're pretty engaging with the process now, so I don't envision a whole lot. It's just now getting back into those buildings on a more consistent basis. And with the 1,700 buildings, we're only getting into a very small percentage of those currently. So it's getting that personnel to get in there on a more regular basis.
And then I just have a quick question around the comprehensive plan. So you're 1,000 this year, 1,000 next, or 100,000 this year, 100,000 in 2023? So
Yes.
2022, 2023. And then moving forward, is there additional costs if there's recommendations that come out of the comprehensive plan around, changes to ordinances or things like that?
Absolutely. Well, we would envision a lot of recommendations coming out of that, particularly updating to the two main land use codes, the zoning ordinance and the subdivision land development ordinance. In previous years, we had started to project some of those, but we want to get through the comprehensive plan because that's going to be a pretty arduous project to get through, multiple years, and then numerous years to get those ordinances updated as well. But take a small bite at the apple at this time and focus on the comprehensive plan, because any amendments to those ordinances need to be generally consistent with the comprehensive plan.
And what kind of community participation? I mean, I'm going to gather that whoever we contract with to do this, there'd be significant, allocation for them to engage and involve with the community, a whole process around that?
There's, yes, and I've personally been on those committees and steering those in my prior life as a consultant. You have key stakeholders, so you involve the institutions, you involve the business community, you involve the residential community, but there are vision sessions that you bring the public in, either hold it here or in larger facilities to get the input of the public, because it really should be a public-driven process.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. And is this the last on staffing, Mr. White?
Yeah, that covered staffing and the planning aspect, because we wanted to touch on the comprehensive plan and make sure that we presented the recommendation to move forward with that. So that covered agenda items 2 and 3.
And do you have anything to add?
I do.
Thank you.
I do, because there are a couple positions being advocated for that are outside of any one particular director's current responsibilities, so I'll touch on a couple of those. Both of the two primary ones were both touched on during public comment, and I'll start by saying I agree with everything we heard, that Radnor has a whole breadth of knowledge and expertise within the community that can help guide these programs. And no matter what comes out of, ultimately, if the board determines it to be a priority, Shade Tree and those experts that volunteer their time will certainly be part of the program. What we had advocated for initially with moving forward with the study is my experience in asking for additional personnel is always a difficult lift. And it's something that the board does not, the board wants to make sure that there is a program that is well-defined and that we know exactly what we're getting into before we start hiring resources to achieve it. So that's a bit of a chicken and the egg type of thing. If hiring the personnel first makes the most sense, which I'm sure we won't get any arguments from our Public Works Director, who can go into detail about how much time he's spending dealing with tree-related issues on a daily basis. all of which detract time from his ability to manage and direct the Public Works Department. So the resource is something that is absolutely needed in one form or another. I was just hesitant to bring that to the board as step one in anticipation of the questions of, well, what is that person going to do? What exactly is the goals and objectives of that position? I do agree that identifying the goals and the objectives of the program is the first step before we start hiring personnel to achieve. That's why we began with the canopy study. And the other origin of that concept was after conversations with Steve Norsini and Ricky and John Hosbeck, our arborist, was during the discussions that came out of the Fenimore project and the course correct that we ultimately did on that project was the concerns raised over the declining canopy in Radnor. So we wanted to address that as kind of the launching point of the larger program. So that's where the study seemed like it made the most sense. But again, I'm absolutely open to different suggestions and recommendations on how to move forward with that. But ultimately, I think a resource, someone to manage whatever comes out of this is going to be necessary. It is not something that Public Works currently has the time, the resources, or expertise to dive into. So that will, whatever we ultimately decide, I think that an additional resource on that front is going to be something that is necessary. It's just the timing of which we'll need to nail down so that the board feels comfortable before we make any of those decisions. But in that whole discussion, I should have led. Clearly, trees is a priority. It's something that the township has prioritized through the Shade Tree Ordinance and the Shade Tree Commission, and how our management of trees works its way into just about every decision that we're making, whether it be our own projects with our parks, ones as big as Fenimore or ones as routine as a basketball resurfacing. Making sure that that our decisions are not impacting trees to that regard. To what the Shade Tree is seeing on their agendas every month, whether it's residential home development or private development. Shade trees are part of just about everything we do. So making sure that we have a well-defined program that not just isn't only legislative but is also operational, so that our staff can work in concert with those different priorities is going to be important going forward. And it's something that right now doesn't exist. We're very reactionary. It's not ideal given what is the apparent priority with trees. So with that, the recommendation is to whether we want to move forward with the study or if we want to move forward with identifying goals and objectives first, but then ultimately nailing down what we think that position might be. It is something that I would advocate for in the 2022 budget. At the same time, the other resource that has been recommended, and this is a continuation. We heard about this during public comment as well, and this was born out of, or a continuation of the discussion we had when the Practical Energy Solutions report was ultimately adopted by the commissioners earlier this year. We had acknowledged that a successful implementation of that program is going to require a resource. And in those discussions and the subsequent ones, we narrowed it down to, I'm not sure that's a full-time job unto itself. We married it with the opportunity to go and seek grants. I do agree with the notion that there are many grant opportunities out there that we are not active participants in, and it does boil down to resources, the time and energy to have someone that is there hitting those sites, understanding the timing, marrying those grant opportunities with different projects and initiatives that we have going on, and then ultimately filing the paperwork and seeing the application through. That's where the heavy lift comes in and the administrative lift comes in that we currently don't have. So I do think that given the amount of money and opportunities that are out there, coupled with all of the different things we have going on as a township, and not just from the environmental side with the sustainability or with the trees and kind of shifting on the spectrum towards stormwater management and then getting into infrastructure. There are grant opportunities across that entire spectrum that we're not touching. Or if we do, it's mostly because our consultants are bringing those forward with the offer to file the application on our behalf. So I am confident that if approved, that position will not only dedicate the time needed to implement the practical energy solutions objectives over time, but also successfully bring outside dollars to Radnor to help pay for those initiatives as well as the other ones that we're working on every day. So I do think that is a position that I'll say self-funding, but I do think that it is something that will have, at the end of the day, a positive impact to the bottom line. I think there's a lot of grant revenue out there that can be generated that will be greater than the cost of a full-time resource.
Bill, can I just stop you there and ask you to speak to the GIS data manager and the intersection of where we are on that?
Sure.
And then the intersection with especially these roles you're speaking to now.
Sure, thank you. It was a month or two ago, the time is blurring, and we had met in an executive session to talk about, and this also lends itself to the discussion with the fire and the recommendation on the fire inspection position as well. With the transition at the county level to a county level health department, coupled with the fact that earlier this summer we lost one of our full-time health officers who went on to pursue her nursing desire, which was ultimately what she wanted to do, and so we were happy that she was able to go after that. That vacated one position. More recently, Marie resigned from Radnor Township to go work for the county as part of their health department. So we have two vacant positions on the health side. As we've discussed, filling those positions doesn't seem prudent. Prudent from a management standpoint in that we no longer have the authority to administer many of the functions that those positions were doing. Those are being taken over by the county beginning next year. And then, realistically speaking, it's very hard to fill a position with someone who is vested knowing that there's a very specific sunset to what it is they're doing. So to overcome those hurdles, Kevin, in community development has found a stopgap through our third-party consultant on the health side to get us from where we're at today to when the county takes the ball on those issues and runs with them, which frees up those two health positions for other opportunities. The one that we had talked about a couple months ago was transitioning to allow for a full-time GIS coordinator position. We are finalizing that job description now. That will go out shortly. As we talked about when we discussed the benefits of having that position, is the GIS is critical in every single department that we have in all the different areas that we operate in, from some of the obvious areas in planning and codes to some of the areas that you may not immediately associate GIS with, and that is police enforcement, call data, where the heat maps are showing the activity is at, to finance, understanding where from a business tax perspective, how much does a certain district generate? Right now, that is combing through thousands of lines of filers and doing some arithmetic and adding it up. The GIS, it'll be married with the system and be able to provide that information to recreation, parks and recreation. So we can understand park usage and marry that with our parks on a mapping system to what we talked about earlier with understanding exactly what our tree canopy is, where it is, what its condition is, which will help identify areas where we should be focusing on replanting, where we should focus on, where maintenance might have a better outcome for those trees. And then, as mentioned during public comment, making sure that that is constantly up to date, and marrying those different outside agencies that were mentioned during public comment, the available data that is out there, bringing that in and loading it into our system. So that the GIS person, that's what their role will be. As we talked about, we already own the software. So the metaphor we've used is we own the car, we just don't have any gasoline or a driver yet. So that's what the GIS coordinator position would be. And the timing on that is finalizing the job description now, and then going full speed.
Bill, so a bunch of these new positions, obviously not for the police, are hopefully going to be revenue neutral.
So if you'll allow me to expand on that a little bit, because it was part of what I wanted to touch on, and it is that for as long as I've been in Radnor, and then for the little time before basically going to when the recession hit in 2007-8, operationally, we have taken the stance of lean. We don't have a lot of positions. We are slow in adding positions. And for that reason, what typically happens before any recommendation or any proposal comes to the board is we're looking internally for opportunities for internal staff to take on additional responsibilities. Can we move things to the outside with a contractor that may be as efficient, and having the internal resources is better for us for any given reason. Those are the things that we're looking at and discussing internally before these positions come to the board. And then ultimately, how they impact with the operating statement. And part of our decision to be lean is that we are very careful when we adjust tax rates. It's usually deliberate and tied to something that is tangible, that is easily expressed back to the community, so we understand exactly why taxes are adjusted. So that lends itself to, if there are opportunities to make a position budget neutral or different ways to fund them, that's going to help allow those positions to rise to the top of what ultimately gets recommended. It just so happens that we do have a couple positions here that legitimately can be self-funding or are already included in what we're spending. So instead of trying to refill the health position or add something else, we have priorities that have come before the township this year that are long-term in nature, so it makes sense to reallocate those and use current resources to fill those. So that is part of what we're discussing internally before we bring these to the board. And it always helps.
So one more follow-up to that. So we have 2 health officer positions, which, let's face it, we're not going to fill. How long do we keep them on the books, quote unquote, until we take them off, knowing that we're not going to fill them? Can we do it this year? Do we do it next year? Because it just seems that this would be one, or 2 jobs that were, are we advertising? We're not wasting money advertising or anything like that.
No. In fact, the one we're reallocating to GIS. So that's one that we're moving on now. More recently, with Marie leaving, that has opened the discussion up for that position. and for the same reasons that you're mentioning, it's not something that, quite frankly, we're going to be able to refill even if we wanted to, knowing the status with the county taking over most of that. So that's the one we're recommending for the fire safety inspector. And the reason why we ultimately decided that position versus some of the others that are being advocated for is, first and foremost, it's life safety. The pictures that Kevin's staff brought back that he presented tonight are real and they're current. And so anytime a life safety matter comes up, that's going to come first. And so it also helps that that is a position within the same department and carries some of the same qualifications as other positions we're looking to fill. So that's why the recommendation on that one is being made. So I think in terms of staffing, planning, and the tree maintenance, that covers those three areas. I know, I think I counted up to 6 positions are being advocated for or coming in front of the board for direction. As we've talked about in the past, and I shared with the board by email earlier this afternoon, if you didn't have a chance to read it, with regard to the police department, we have a lot of fun discussions, and the chief had another meeting, so he had to run. But out of those 3, understanding again that raising taxes and funding these things is always a difficult discussion, especially when we have so many different priorities to choose from. I would recommend out of those 3, if we were considering one, to move with the Office of Emergency Management Coordinator in that position, again, because it's real. Not that the other positions are not, but it is something that we are missing right now. There are opportunities and aspects of that job that the chief pointed out that are things that we would be doing every day if we had the time and the time and the resources to do. I'm not discounting the high-density beat. I agree that those are priorities. Otherwise, we wouldn't have presented them to the board. For those, I'm asking that we continue to evaluate in future budget cycles as A, more data becomes available, and B, maybe more resources are available where we don't have so many different competing ends. And the area that the chief pointed out that requires or calls for the additional service, we do have officers on the street, similar to our fire company and the requests we've heard in recent years from them. Would additional resources be better? Yep. The response times will be shorter. There's more proactive opportunities in those areas. But again, given the restraints and how thin our opportunities are for increasing funding, with the OEM, for me, would be the one that I would ask the board to consider strongly, as well as the other positions. So the sustainability, we have opportunities to pay for that. So I would recommend that we consider that one. Same with the fire safety inspector. That is something we actually don't necessarily have to wait for the budget cycle to approve. It's an expense that we're already incurring. It's money that we're already generating, not from the fee, but it's money already built into our operations. So that's reallocating the position. So that's one that I would recommend. And I've covered up my notes, so let me go back to that.
But Bill, just to clarify there, you don't need to reallocate the health director into an inspector. It could reallocate into comprehensive planning or funding the grant sustainability person. So it doesn't have to be within the same department, right?
Yes, that is absolutely true. The one, I would not recommend tying that with the comprehensive plan, only because the comprehensive plan is going to be an outside consultant that we're going to hire to quarterback through that. That's not a resource that we would want full-time. We have our staff on on board already, that will help from the staff perspective through that and provide the consultant with the information needed. And at the end of the day, when they deliver us a comprehensive plan, they move on to their next client. There's not an ongoing requirement for that, whereas the other positions are perpetual in nature. There are things that are going to be with us for as far out as we can see.
So I'm hearing you want to keep staffing money in staffing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then the last resource to consider is the tree. And that position would most align with the Public Works Department. So it'd be someone in the Public Works Department that would have the tree expertise. When we talk about qualifications for that position, it'd be some sort of someone who has extensive experience, both in terms of actual on-the-job duties as well as the educational side and the certificates necessary. But that would be that position. Now, our ideal candidate would include those elements. So if there's any more specific questions on the positions, I'm happy to answer them, or if we want, I mean, we have our department heads here. If there's any specific questions, perhaps for Ricky in terms of the trees, and I'm sure he'd love to talk about the time he spends dealing on that particular item. And again, I don't want to make light of it. It's real, and this would be, if the board has questions or wants a better understanding of what the day-to-day looks like, Ricky's here to address those. And then once all the board's questions have been answered on that front, we can transition into number 5 on the agenda. And I've got a short presentation on that.
So just quickly, and maybe I will take you up on on Ricky's expertise. So would this position be a certified arborist? Ricky, is that what you envision, or?
Yes, that is what we're trying to go for.
Okay. And would this person also work with you? And I know we've been kind of working through this ourselves on a project, on some of the ordinances and things like that with regards to, outside the shade tree ordinance, but some of the other things that deal with trees in the township?
Yes, anything that has to do with trees, it'll be in his basket.
Okay.
Or her basket.
Mr. Foster, can you speak a little bit to what Mr. White was saying, is that what is the burden on you now that this would alleviate?
Let me see. I have about 4 things that I had written down probably on a daily basis. The work has ebbs and flows. It could be anywhere from I spend a whole day dealing with some of these tree concerns to a few hours in a day, and sometimes these spill over to after hours. A couple times it was some weekend emails, but I have about 4 things here. The first one is right-of-way tree concerns. That goes from fielding calls, measuring trees, then we have to bring in the township arborist, and he makes a determination on what needs to happen with those trees, whether they get pruned, or if they're an emergency and need to be removed ASAP, or if they still need to be removed, but they can be put on our bid list to be put in front of the commissioners and then get put in front of tree companies to be bidded out. Then we have our tree concerns on private property. That is what Commissioner Borowski was speaking of. It's where a lot of residents, unfortunately, I'll give them a lot of credit because they've tried to sort some matters out on their own, but if they're not able to resolve it, then there's an ordinance in the shade tree that deals with 263-6 subsection C, where it specifically says the Public Works Director is to get involved in these issues. And I have about 5 on my desk right now that we're kind of going, trying to resolve with the neighbors. And it's not easy, but that's something that's taken a lot of time. So we've had to revisit the ordinance with Mr. Norsini and also Township Manager Bill White to try to correct the language. And even on the Shade Tree Commission, it was brought up in retrospect of trying to change how it's worded, because there's specific wording that says it should be taken care of in about 5 days, which is very unrealistic with some of these prices of trees, and also with the availability of these tree companies to come in and be able to do the work in a timely fashion and safe manner. The third area, there's tree removals on residential property where we get Residents would call in, and they would see trees being removed, maybe on their neighbor's property, and we have to follow up and make sure that tree company is registered. They're not, they have a permit for whatever work they're carrying out, and in some cases, when they do not, we have to go and inspect, shut them down, and also there are fines that ensue. Our township arborist is also brought in for that. So that's another area. And the final one is what was mentioned about our parks. We do not have anyone to go through the parks. Usually, we call our township arborist. Let's just take, for example, the bike trail. Usually after a storm, the township arborist would be called in. He'd go do an assessment of what was found on the bike trail. And in, let's say, May, we went up and we had an assessment of what was up there. We had another assessment later, and that number that we initially had grew. So if we had someone that was able to do that on a regular basis, you know, things would happen a lot more swiftly and we'd have a better count of what's going on. Currently in the parks, there's no one going around assessing all of these trees and just seeing what's needed. The shade tree is working with us beautifully to help with our planning program and reinstalling new trees in the parks, but even that, we kind of lean on them and we help with where the plants are, where the trees are going, but we don't have anyone that would go out from the township and say, this is where I want this tree planted, this is why. So that position, that person will be perfect to do that and work along with the committees that are trying to basically beautify our tree program even more.
Ricky, first I'd like to say thank you. Second of all, it's great that we have a bunch of, lack of a better term, tree advocates out there. And if there's a place for a tree to be planted, they say so. Fenimore Woods is a perfect example of that. Even in Clemacrone Park, Tammy, we had the arborists out there, and we had a nice arbor day. And we planted a bunch of trees there. This leads me to my next question, speaking of arborists. Currently, John Hosback is kind of the unofficial or official township arborist. Is he official township arborist, or?
Yeah, he's been appointed as our independent.
Okay. So he's
township
contracted. So would his role kind of phase out? Would we still use him? Because there are a lot of trees. What would happen? Would we have like an independent contractor, and then on top of that, we'd have a full-time arborist? Just speak to that if you could. Sure.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Ricky. If I miss something, feel free. No, a lot's going to depend on what the ultimate goals and objectives of the program is, and then the level of expertise that we want managing it from our perspective. I do think there's always going to be a need for an independent arborist, especially as long as the code that Ricky cited off the top of his head still exists as written. Because anytime there's a hazard tree on private property, having the independent review is going to be an important and necessary. So again, it's all going to depend on how we define the program and who we want running it, and what we're willing to spend on it.
Thanks.
Hey, Jack. I've got to run and do some parent responsibilities. So my comments for number 5. You know, I've been back out and spoke with the neighbors on Highland Avenue and surrounding streets, and they would really like to see that project be moved from 2023, 2024, at least to get some funding in there next year so we can start talking about a comfort station and start making progress. So, you know, as you discuss what the priorities are for this budget, those are my comments, and I'd like to see some funding in there so we can start those conversations.
Okay, moving on to item 5, final budget recommendation, wrap-up and decisions.
So, as we discussed earlier in this meeting and through some of our prior ones, Ian, if you could fire up the laptop over on the side here, is that we've been building on these different priorities and different discussion items, ultimately leading to what is going to be an ordinance that establishes the township's 2022 millage rate, sewer rent rate, and stormwater fee We just want to make sure that that final budget that is associated with that ordinance includes the items or the priorities that the board wants to see. And in doing that, and maybe helping kind of steer the conversation or bring all of these different pieces, parts together, we put this presentation together quickly. We've already touched on the staffing and planning presentations as well as the tree canopy program, which actually, I have another thought on that to maybe throw out there. But, and then, which will lead us into what we'll call the final budget recommendations. Again, already touching on the staffing, but tying in our community organizations that were discussed at the last special meeting, OPEB for just 2022, and then ultimately millage and sewer rates. And then also, quickly, just identifying what the remaining calendar looks like. So, again, just circling back, 2022, as presented, is a balanced budget. We are in the black, revenues and expenses to the tune of roughly, or just shy of 200,000. I think 192 and change is the number. However, we understand that for 2022, we are expecting 1.6 million in the federal stimulus funds that represent recovery funds for the lost business tax revenue from the 2020 COVID-related shutdowns. So that is one-time money for 2022. We will not get that again. Well, we're not anticipating getting anything more going into those future years. These numbers include our base operations, so it's the township departments as they exist today with staffing levels as they are today, which then keeps service delivery at today's levels. This includes the departmental operating capital, which we tie back to those departments' ability to offer and deliver those services, is needing the right capital, the right equipment and vehicles and fleet to get the job done. These numbers do include that for 2022. These numbers also include what has been requested by the community organizations. One exception, and this was born, or this recommendation's coming out of the last meeting we had, and then a subsequent discussion with the Wayne Arts Center. The township did include the Arts Center on a bond, and the Arts Center is paying that bond back to the amount of roughly $70,000 per year for the next 12 or 13 years. In that same bond issue, the township borrowed for the library and some improvements there that were done back in the 2004 window. So that's not the library improvements that were borrowed for and completed back in 2015 and 16. Those were improvements from a decade earlier. The Board of Commissioners in 2010 forgave the library's portion of those bonds, which shifted the funding responsibility over to the township, and we've been paying for that portion of the bonds since, or pursuant to that forgiveness. With the Wayne Arts Center, the opportunity is there to forgive their share of the loan or those bonds, and then the township take over those debt payments. And that seems like precedent was set in 2010 with the library. That seems like a logical way to proceed, to be perfectly honest, with the Art Center, is we will take over the remainder of those payments, and then that would be in lieu of continuing to contribute to their operations on an annual basis. Because they are contributing, their debt repayment exceeds the amount that they're asking for operations anyway, which was the same argument made by the library back in 2010, that the township was contributing a significant amount to their operations, and they were turning around and cutting a check back to us. What exists with the Art Center is the same opportunity. If we forgive that loan, then that would eliminate them at least my recommendation would be that that would be in lieu of any contributions back to the Art Center going forward. So the rest of the community organizations are included in the budget as requested. The other caveat with all of that, I didn't include it in the text on the presentation, is with the fire company and the concept of with the SAFER grants that they were awarded and the staff hired that are being paid for with the grants for the next couple of years. Instead of waiting until year 4 to have a large expenditure to the fire company as they assume the cost of those personnel, ramping up the funding over time to get us so that there's not a big impact to the general fund in that year. There were some concerns raised during the discussion in that meeting about sending the money to the fire company for something that they're going to pay for in a few years. An alternative concept would be to identify the expense within the general fund, but instead of giving it to the fire company in years 2022, 23, and 24, those monies are deposited into the township's escrow account and held there until needed by the fire company when that day comes. And then in 2024, 25, when the grant has exhausted and the responsibility for paying for that staff is now on the fire company, and additional resources are needed from the township, we will have an amount sitting in an escrow fund to help the two benefits. First is whatever amount over and above the increases we've incorporated in the next 3 years' budgets is needed will be a smaller impact. So we're not looking at hundreds of thousands at once. That's benefit one. The second benefit is that there is money identified within the township's accounts that can be used to, again, smooth out the contributions from the township to the fire company over future periods. Or if there are changes made that free up money from the fire company side that allow them additional resources to pay for staffing so that the burden isn't on the township to fund that. If I don't know, there's some windfall that we can't sit here today and predict, if that occurs over the next couple of years, then the money's in the township bank account and we can pull it back in. And it doesn't leave our bank accounts, but it accomplishes basically the same goals. So if the board agrees with the smoothing concept, I would recommend that we do that through the escrow option, where we're depositing that money into our account, holding it for the fire company or for that staffing for when that day comes.
If it's in escrow, are we required to give it to them by law? I know it's just an earmark.
Yeah, so that's a fair question. There are, that's a good distinction, so there are things that are put in escrow that are legally bound to those entities. Those would consist of any monies that don't originate from the township. So if it's a private developer submitting money to the township to pay for engineering and legal reviews of their plans, that's their money, that has to be returned back to them. We would basically be our own, it's our money until the board decides that it's not.
So we're the custodian of money that we're probably going to give to them. I mean, is it not a nightmare, but is it cumbersome on the administrative side to keep track of this? It's just I'm sure you got a bunch of accounts there. You have a few?
Just a few.
Okay. So one more. Okay.
One more. And Amy does a great job of keeping track of all that. So, yeah, I am confident that is a feasible, low-impact option to kind of get us to the same target a few years down the road.
So Bill, just quickly, can I ask, so how much, or Amy might be able to, how much money could we potentially, so they've got the grant for the personnel that they have right now, and potentially, when that grant is over, which is 3 years? 3 years coming up. So that could be either loses personnel, or then we would have, as a township, have to assume that funding. And that's about $250,000, correct? Bill, Eamon?
Well, I'm going to ask the fire company to answer questions on their grant.
Okay.
I don't
I
want
just
to
want
misspeak.
to make sure, because I like the smoothing concept. I think that is a good idea. I like the escrow idea. And then I think, we need to examine some other opportunities to help and support the fire company. But, Eamon, what would that look like? So you guys have the state grant. You have the 2 personnel, correct? That
Yes.
you definitely need. When that grant goes away, you guys will assume those salaries, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the way that the grant's set up, it's a federal grant through FEMA, and it's a SAFER grant. SAFER stands for Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response. So 2 positions that we have, they're funded for the 3-year period. There's some exceptions with overtime and some other things that aren't eligible for reimbursement. But then, yes, in year 4, you are responsible to fund them at 100% moving forward. If the money's not there, then those people will no longer be employed.
How hard is it to get those grants, and how often do they come around?
For some perspective, Pennsylvania was only awarded 0.9% of all the available funds in the entire country, which was 2 awards statewide. So we didn't get it this year, was the past cycle. And I believe there's only 4 statewide. So they're extremely competitive. A number of our neighbors have attempted to apply for grants, been denied multiple times. So, I mean, based on our financial management, the health of the township, we were able to be successful in our grant. But they're extremely hard to get, and we're very fortunate to have that as a community.
Thanks, Eamon.
All right. Thank you.
Are grants like this, would they fall under the purview of a new grants person of the township to also be working hand in hand with our essential partners like fire to seek other funding streams?
Yes, we would absolutely extend that person to the fire company, library, seniors, the organizations that we work very closely with, absolutely. So again, looking at the base numbers for the general fund, they are balanced for 2022. And then we get into some of the other initiatives, priorities, requests. So this, for those in the room, you can see the mouse. This is the 2022, this is kind of below the line. So we have the roughly $200,000 or $190,000 positive balance or net revenue. Then these items would be incorporated in. These are the different requests. For example, we have the police, the OEM manager position budgeted at roughly $125,000 for 2022. That assumes an effective date of April 1, 2022, because there will be a lag time if the board said go right now. There's through civil service and the testing process, it'll take a few months to bring that position on board or to fill the vacated position from the ripple effect of the allocation within the department. At the same time, our engineering sustainability coordinator, we've identified $65,000 in roughly half year's worth of expense. Again, trying to recognize or budget for anticipated time frame between decision and hiring. We've learned with some of our positions that we tried to fill recently that while there's a lot of engineers out there, there weren't a lot that were interested here. We have solved that problem, by the way. We do have an engineer. that will be starting with us in January. But that was a position that we started advertising for in April. So if the board says it's a priority, we will start moving on it. What we're trying to identify here is just some timing, recognize the timing of some of these decisions. This $100,000 here represents what would essentially be half of the expected cost for the contract for the comp plan update. As Kevin had pointed out in his presentation, there's $100,000 identified in our forecast for '23. And then we even identified the cost of some of the ordinance rewrites that will most certainly come out of an updated comprehensive plan then in years 24, 25. And then extremely light, I think it's blue on my computer, but up there it's invisible. Our money's identified for the tree canopy. Again, as presented to the board, this would include dollars for a study as well as the hiring of a person later in 2022. If we want to rethink that, the monies can be allocated in any way if approved within the budget. So if the better approach is let's work with the Shade Tree and Ricky, the Conservancy, through the Shade Tree Committee to develop the goals and objectives of the program as a recommendation that eventually comes to the board, we can do that. And at the same time, write the job description. So what ultimately gets delivered to the board at some point in 2022 is goals, objectives, and a job description. Then we move accordingly. That is definitely an option. If the monies are allocated here or in the budget, it doesn't have to go to a study, it doesn't have to go to a person. It can be spent on whatever direction the board provides for that item. And in fact, in thinking this through and talking out loud and hearing the public comment, that's probably the better way to go with that particular issue. And in fact, that mirrors what the sustainability report did. It didn't go through committee necessarily. The Green Team spearheaded it, but in hiring the third-party consultant that eventually developed the program that came before the board for approval. That if we were to go that route, that might be the better way to go. But the monies would need to be included in the budget to pay for either the person or however we want to proceed.
Bill, can I jump in? So the cash balance is going 8.2, 9.1, all the way back down to 6.7. So when it goes back down to 6.7, I guess you're expecting a tax increase, hopefully somewhere in there.
I'm getting there.
Yeah. Just real quick.
Don't spoil the ending.
Sorry. Yeah. Not a happy ending.
Sorry.
Yeah. What is the budget shortfall now? I mean, are we, what number where are we now and what number do we have to keep to maintain that minimum? I'm just so I have the starting point as you go through this.
Absolutely. Let me, if you don't mind, let me finish up on these priorities and objectives, and then I'll circle back, because they are on this tab, and to answer your question about where we're at today in 2020, I can show that quickly. So part of what is identified in these additions to our budget, the last item that we've included is a $300,000 direct allocation to fund balance. So that would be that the board says in 2022, $300,000 would be earmarked to start to restore the cash balances that have been dipped into the last 2 years. And so to achieve all that, we're starting with roughly again, I'll use 200,000 from base operations. We're adding roughly 671 here. That 671 includes the 300,000 that is basically just going to the savings account. So the actual additional expense is more like 371. In order to pull all that off and remain balanced, a millage adjustment of 0.08 mils would be necessary. That would generate $500,000 of revenue to the township. In terms of the math, that's a 3.5% adjustment over today's rate. And that would keep us in the black for 2022 and allow for these various initiatives to be incorporated in the budget. Commissioner Farhi, to address your question about the cash, yes, so you're correctly identifying at the bottom of the spreadsheet the high water mark for the fund balance. We were in compliance in 2019 at a little over 9 million. Then in 2020 and 2021, I jump back to the previous slide, you could see on the operating statement that we had a large deficit in 2020, which again, I mean, that goes back directly to the immediate decline in our business taxes as a result of the shutdowns and how those impacted the businesses. And while at the same time continuing to operate and provide the same level of service. For 2021, we anticipated another $1.5 million use of fund balance. So that's where you're seeing the decline from, a little over 9 million down to the 6+ million that, yeah, so 2021, I'm sorry, 5.1 million at the end of 2021.
What's the minimum amount, and how do you compute the formula, for the minimum amount?
Well,
or I'll let you
yeah,
keep
well,
going,
the
I'm
absolute
sorry.
minimum is 0.
Yes.
And we want to stay very clear of that. The fund balance policy as it exists today requires 25% of annual expenditures. So that is the math that's occurring at the bottom of the spreadsheet here. And what these projectors show is in visible font.
Yes, so what is, so like 25% of like 40-ish?
Yeah, so, just shy of 9 million.
Okay.
8.8 would be the policy amount for 2021 this year. Obviously, as expenses grow, so does the requirement for fund balance. So for 2022, if those items were to be included, minus the 300,000 for the fund balance, because we wouldn't double count that into the policy, the requirement is just a few $1,000s over 9 million. So we'll be, several million short of that from a fund balance perspective. And so that, in what's being recommended or proposed here tonight with these different priorities, initiatives, and ultimately the adjustment in the millage is trying to incorporate moving forward with the initiatives that I think we've heard on a number of different occasions with a number of different projects are priorities. But ultimately, if it's a priority, it'll need to be funded. And if we're not in a place, because I do want to recognize a couple things that we've talked about internally, we talked about in some of our meetings, that recognizing that we are still, or many are still feeling the impacts from the COVID related economic impacts, whether it be their personal jobs or their businesses. While our tax revenues have recovered, there's still many people feeling those effects. And at the same time, most of the residential taxpayers are, realized a change in tax, an increase in real estate tax as a result of the reassessment. And that was just last year. So while the township didn't get additional revenue, we want to be cognizant of the fact that that doesn't mean people aren't paying more. And I think most of us that own houses in Radnor are speaking from that side of the transaction, myself included. So we're trying to be sensitive to that and limit any kind of millage adjustment to only capture exactly what we're talking about with very specific initiatives or priorities assigned to future budgets, and starting to identify cash that can go back into the fund balance, which the last 2 years proved is absolutely critical to our operation. The fund balance is what allowed us to continue to operate.
Just one question from earlier conversations and staffing. You say that you're keeping the staffing at the base from this year moving forward. So is there no cost of living increase for Radnor Township staff this year, or is that built in?
So what is built into the budget is a up to 2.75% for the Radnor staff. The unionized staff, that will be increased on January 1 pursuant to those collective bargaining. As we've done historically for the civilian staff, it is up to 2.75 based on performance. As is the case in any given year, there are certain staff members that, if I would advocate other adjustments for, higher adjustments for, I'd like, when the time is right, to have that discussion with the board in executive session on those personnel. But those numbers, whether approved or not, are in what you're looking at tonight.
And then I don't want to steal the punchline, but can you give us a sense of what the effect of this millage increase would be on the average Radnor Township resident?
Yeah, so for the median household, this millage increase is about $20 for the year. And the average is slightly higher at like $24. But we have some high assessed values on the residential side that kind of, if you picture the bell graph, they kind of skew that average higher. Most of our residents, statistics tells us this, but most of our residents are in the median. The average is skewed a bit because of a couple high numbers. But so $20 to $24 for the year for the average or median.
So 24, 25 on this. We haven't gotten to stormwater or sewer. We're expecting raises there as well. And then, so this is great on this end. So people can kind of figure that out when most people have a mortgage statement. People can figure that out. On the great checks that we get to write, what is it, every April? For a couple $100 on top of that. Just
Is that the sewer?
a nice number if we are raising sewer, or you expect that we have to raise sewer, you expect that we have to raise stormwater. To the people at home, what is that number that we're possibly looking at?
Yep. So I didn't include these were in the last presentation. I threw them at the back of this one in case the question came up. So I appreciate you bringing it up. We did talk about this based on the operations for the sanitary sewer fund. The break even is $8.90 would be the amount needed. So there would be an increase there. It's difficult to talk in averages and because water consumption is very unique to the household.
You live by yourself or you have a family of 7. Got it.
Exactly. And the number of sinks and showers that you have will change that significantly too. Some of the folks that don't have a second meter and water their lawn, that will factor into there as well. So it's just hard. There's really no bell curve to throw this under.
There isn't, but if you're saying that we're increasing sewer prices 5%, then we could expect that, all things being equal, their whatever they're paying would go up 5%.
Yes, that is accurate, yes. Okay. All things being equal. For stormwater, again, this ties back to the discussions we had with the stormwater funding plan, that there is no anticipated rate changes for stormwater for several years, that we're financing some of those larger projects. As that financing comes on, there may be a need for $1 or $2 per unit, but that's, I think, at the earliest 2024, 25. And that is variable depending on the ultimate price of the projects, the timing of those projects, and how much money is in the fund that might be able to be used to forego those increases. So there's still a number of variables on the stormwater front. So for the foreseeable future, I don't anticipate any needing any rate changes there. So, so for now, it would be the millage adjustment. And we did put the slide in. Just this is in the executive summary of the budget that has been published. It has a running tally of the various tax increases dating back to 2012. And I know everyone's got their perspective on it, but I think it does show that, for the township, tax adjustments are usually very deliberate and defined. And so we can point back to why adjustments were made. And ultimately, for 2022, if approved, we've got these different initiatives that we can point to on the operations side to talk about the necessity. So I can jump back into the spreadsheet if needed, but these are the numbers that we'd be looking at. Ultimately, as we talked about at the start of the meeting, tonight was intended to be presentation, question, and answer so that the board has the information you need heading into the November 8th meeting where the budget ordinance is scheduled to be introduced. And it's at that point we'll need specific direction on what to include or what not to with regard to either these initiatives and then ultimately how that translates into the millage. And that's it.
We've been jumping in pretty regularly. Do we have any last comments?
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Public participation.
Jack, actually, before we do that, at the last meeting, I was not my best self. I was condescending toward Lisa, and that was wrong of me. And I wanted you to know that I will do my best to be better, and I apologize for that. So I do want to, when I'm wrong, I fess up. I'm happy to do that. So my apologies.
Great. Any last comment? Seeing none, I will move to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you all.